Hey there, thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button. It really means a lot to me. And if you've got a job with its own set of strange rules, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below and share your experiences. Now let's get into the story. I still remember the stale smell that first hit me when I entered the old mental asylum's lobby. It wasn't exactly rotting or moldy, more like the scent of dust, age, and far too many secrets hidden behind locked doors. The building had been around for decades, weathering storms both literal and figurative. I didn't think much of it when I accepted the position as a night shift janitor. I was in desperate need of a job, and the ad simply read, "Janitorial staff wanted, evening hours, competitive pay." The asylum's name was on the listing, but it had been repurposed as a historical facility of sorts, or so I thought. They never truly explained what kind of museum it was supposed to be. The day before I started, I met the superintendent, Mr. Gilroy, a short, wiry man whose eyes darted around as if he expected something to leap out at him any second. He barely looked at me during the interview and kept fiddling with a ring of keys that jangled at his side. For the most part, the only things he asked were whether I had reliable transportation and if I could handle unusual tasks without complaint. Of course, being strapped for cash, I said yes to everything. He never bothered to sugarcoat the job's creepiness, but I brushed off the odd warnings. I needed the paycheck. That first night, I arrived 10 minutes early. The exterior of the asylum was pitch black except for a single dim lamp that illuminated the front steps. It felt like the building itself was waiting for me, holding its breath. When I pushed open the heavy front door, it groaned like an old bell tower, and I half expected someone to jump out and shout, "Boo!" But no one greeted me. Inside, the lobby was as sparse as I remembered it from my short interview. No reception desk, no chairs, just a giant space with peeling wallpaper and dusty floors. The only sign of life was a small office on the right, where I could see a faint glow from a single bulb. I followed that light and found Mr. Gilroy sitting behind a metal desk, reading from a thick binder. "Good, you're on time," he said softly, handing me a ring of keys and a battered spiral notebook. His hands shook a bit as he did. "You'll need these. Lock up after you're done with each wing. Don't want anyone or anything wandering off." He paused, stared at me, then added, "I'm serious. Read the notebook before you get started. It has the rules." "Rules? For mopping floors?" I tried to sound calm, but my voice cracked a little. I'd never had to follow a set of instructions beyond the standard safety guidelines, certainly nothing that required a worn-out notebook. Gilroy just shook his head. "They'll keep you safe, trust me." Then, in a voice so low it was almost a whisper, he added, "Don't ever break them, or you'll regret it." I stood there, holding the notebook like a precious artifact. When I glanced back up, he was already out the door. Alone in the small office, I flipped open the cover. The first few pages were filled with handwritten lines, some scribbled in haste, others carefully penned in block letters. Every rule was numbered, though not all numbers followed in order. Some lines were crossed out or partially erased. The writing styles varied, suggesting multiple authors over the years. The first page read, "Rule 1. Start your shift at precisely 9 p.m., not a minute earlier or later. Rule 2. You must finish your rounds by 2 a.m. At 2:01, lock yourself in the supply closet on the first floor. Rule 3. If you see a figure in a white gown pacing the hallways, do not speak. Avoid eye contact. Proceed to a different floor immediately. Rule 4. If you hear humming or soft singing from room 103, ignore it and do not enter. Pretend you didn't hear anything. Rule 5. Every hour, write your name and the time in this notebook to prove you're still here. Skip no entries. Rule 6. At midnight, you may notice the lights flicker. If they stay off for more than 10 seconds, remain absolutely still. Rule 7. There is a locked door on the 3rd floor. Never open it. Never knock. Never stand near it for more than 5 seconds. and so on. The list continued for several pages, detailing bizarre instructions that sounded more like an old folktale than a janitorial manual. Yet, there was an unshakable conviction in the words. I felt a surge of unease wash over me. I glanced at the time. 8:58 p.m. The first rule said I had to start at 9 p.m. exactly. I stood by the office clock, feeling my heartbeat pulse in my ears. The second the digital screen changed to 9 o'clock, I stepped out into the hallway. The first wing was quiet, lined with old patient rooms and an occasional flickering overhead light. My cleaning cart squeaked along the cracked tiles, and I tried to focus on the ordinary tasks: sweeping, mopping, wiping windows. For a while everything seemed normal, albeit unsettlingly silent. I told myself it was just an old building with a creepy history. I was determined not to let fear get the better of me. At around 9:45, I reached room 103. The door was closed, and I remembered Rule 4 about humming or singing. I paused, pressing my ear against the old wood. Silence. Relieved, I continued down the hall, but as soon as I took a few steps away, I heard a faint melody drifting behind me. It was so soft I might have imagined it. A gentle hum like a lullaby someone would sing to a child. Every hair on my neck stood on end. My first instinct was to check if a radio had been left on, but the rule specifically said to ignore it. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to keep walking, pushing the cart a bit faster. My heart pounded. I did what the rule said. I did not investigate. By 10 p.m., I was supposed to document my name and the time in the spiral notebook. I found a small table near the stairwell, set the notebook down, and scribbled 9 p.m. Carl M. 10 p.m. Carl M. Just as I finished writing the second entry, the overhead lights buzzed. A short flicker. Anxiety gnawed at me. I recalled Rule 6 about midnight flickers, but it wasn't quite midnight yet, so I kept my composure. Then, I locked up the first wing and headed to the second. The second floor had fewer rooms but a large recreation area. Old chairs were scattered around, some overturned, some looking as if they hadn't been moved in ages. A few shelves still contained dusty board games and tattered books. I tried to imagine this place back when it was operational. Patients sitting around, nurses on duty, doctors pacing the halls. The quiet now felt oppressive. While mopping near the corner of the rec room, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone or something was standing in the hallway, just out of the room's light. A shape in white, the faint outline of a gown brushing the floor. Rule 3 sprang to mind. If you see a figure in a white gown pacing the hallways, do not speak. Avoid eye contact. Proceed to a different floor immediately. My grip on the mop tightened. The figure was still, not pacing, but it wore something that looked very close to a hospital gown. I forced myself to look away and started gathering my supplies in a rush. My heart pounded as I pushed the cart toward the stairs. I tried not to glance back, but I couldn't help taking one more look. The hallway was empty. I raced down to the first floor, forcing deep breaths to calm myself. Half of me questioned if it was my mind playing tricks. The other half remembered the seriousness in Mr. Gilroy's eyes when he handed me the notebook. I decided to trust the rules. Time passed in a haze of fear and duty. I kept cleaning, ticking items off my mental checklist: mop floors, empty trash, sanitize surfaces. Eventually I found a working clock that read 11:30 p.m. I had half an hour before the dreaded midnight flicker. My entire body felt tense as I continued, double-checking every room, listening for any sign that I wasn't alone. I made my 11 p.m. entry in the notebook. 11 p.m. Carl M. The notebook was starting to feel less like a formality and more like a lifeline. Every time I wrote my name, it reminded me that I was still okay, still alive. At 11:59 p.m., I stationed myself near the stairwell on the first floor. The building was unbelievably silent. Even the usual hum of old fluorescent lights seemed muted. I watched the second hand on my phone creep towards midnight. Just as it hit midnight, the entire hallway plunged into darkness. My breath caught in my throat, I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By the time I reached 10, the lights still hadn't come back on. Rule 6 warned, if they stay off for more than 10 seconds, remain absolutely still. My instinct screamed to move, to run for the office. But I followed the rules. I kept perfectly still, refusing even to shuffle my feet. My eyes were wide open, staring into the blackness. The darkness felt suffocating, like a living thing pressing down on me. After what felt like an eternity, the overhead lights sputtered back to life. A flicker, then a dull glow. I exhaled a shaking breath. My shirt was damp with sweat. I was grateful I'd followed the rule because I had the spine-chilling sense that if I hadn't, something might have noticed. By 12:15 a.m., I decided to check the third floor. According to the notebook, I needed to clean the corridor outside the old administrative offices. But I couldn't forget Rule 7. There is a locked door on the third floor. Never open it. Never knock. Never stand near it for more than 5 seconds. The steps leading to the third floor were narrow and steep. The air felt heavier as I climbed. When I reached the corridor, the overhead lights were dimmer than on the lower floors. I saw a series of doors on each side, most labeled with old plaques. Director's office, records room, staff lounge. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust. At the far end of the hallway stood a single door without a label. It looked ancient, carved from some dark wood. A heavy lock, dark with rust, hung from the handle. I assumed that was the door mentioned in the rule. Instead of going near it, I decided to clean in the opposite direction first. I took my time mopping, occasionally peering over my shoulder. The hallway was silent. Even the usual buzz of electricity seemed absent here. Each step echoed loudly, reminding me how alone I was. A sudden metallic clang startled me. It came from behind that locked door, a deep echoing rattle, as though something large had shifted or fallen inside. I froze. My heart thundered in my ears. The rule came back to me. Never stand near it for more than 5 seconds. So I backed away, counting in my head. I reached the stairwell in 4 seconds. Another series of clanging noises echoed behind me, but I didn't dare stay to investigate. I hurried down to the second floor, my pulse racing. I felt a bit guilty about leaving my cleaning tasks incomplete, but survival took precedence. There was a restroom there that I hadn't cleaned yet, so I decided to focus on that until my heartbeat slowed. As I was finishing up, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured steps that didn't belong to me. I turned off the water, listening. The footsteps paused right outside the restroom door. A low, raspy sound, like faint breathing, reached my ears. I remembered multiple rules about ignoring certain sounds and avoiding certain figures. Yet, none directly addressed what to do if someone or something was literally outside a door, blocking your exit. My mind raced. Should I wait it out? I told myself I'd give it a minute. 1 minute turned into 2, then 3. The footsteps resumed, fading down the corridor. Cautiously, I peeked out. The hallway was empty. At that moment, though, I spotted a piece of paper stuck to the wall, like a small flyer. I inched closer to read it. Don't let him see your face. Keep your head down. Don't speak. The handwriting matched the notebooks. My blood ran cold. I had no idea who he was, but I was grateful I'd stayed hidden. My watch read 1:45 a.m. Time was slipping away faster than I liked. One rule demanded I lock myself in the supply closet at exactly 2:01 a.m. I decided to do one last check of the first floor before following that instruction. The building felt especially ominous now, as if it sensed my shift was almost done. In the main hallway, I noticed a door slightly ajar, one that led into a small patient room I hadn't seen before. Against my better judgment, I pushed it open. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the persistent thought that I needed to be thorough. Inside, the walls were covered in old drawings done by someone with a shaky hand. Rough sketches depicted figures with blurred faces and tall silhouettes standing behind them. I felt a sudden urge to leave, but then I saw an old record player in the corner. It was softly spinning, the needle stuck in a groove, producing a repetitive clicking sound. I recalled nothing in the rules about music or record players. My heart pounded as I backed away from the room. Don't investigate oddities, I reminded myself. Just do your job. At 2 a.m. on the dot, I rushed to the supply closet. It was a cramped space packed with mop buckets, cleaning chemicals, and boxes of rags. I locked the door from the inside at exactly 2:01 a.m., as the rule stated. Then I waited, unsure what would happen next. The air in the closet felt stale and thick, yet I felt a strange sense of safety being behind a locked door. I glanced at the notebook. 2 a.m. Carl M. I wrote the entry in a hurry, then sat on an upside-down bucket, controlling my breathing. The next few minutes were excruciating. Through the door, I heard a soft clicking, similar to the record player but faster. Then footsteps, distant at first, grew nearer. Whoever it was walked the hallway right outside, sometimes pausing near the closet. Each pause made my skin crawl. The handle jiggled once. I held my breath, terrified that the lock might fail. But it didn't. After a few heart-stopping seconds, the footsteps continued down the hall. Time dragged on, and soon 2:15 turned to 2:30. I checked the next rule in the notebook. Stay locked in the supply closet for no less than 1 hour and no more than 2, so I marked my phone's timer to alert me at 3:01 a.m. Waiting in the dark tested every ounce of my self-control. At times, I heard faint whispers, as though people were having a low conversation outside. I couldn't make out words, just the gentle rise and fall of voices. My imagination conjured images of translucent figures congregating in the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door, but even that felt too daring. At 3:01 a.m., my alarm vibrated silently. The footsteps and whispers had disappeared about 20 minutes earlier. I slowly unlocked the door and peered out. The corridor was empty, illuminated by the dim overhead lights, most of which were still flickering. I exhaled in relief. So far I have followed every rule. I was still alive. I made my way back to the small office by the front lobby. On the way, I noticed that room 103's door was slightly open now. A gentle humming drifted out, exactly like the lullaby I'd heard earlier. My stomach clenched. I reminded myself of Rule 4 and forced myself to keep walking. I didn't even glance inside. When I reached the office, the door was cracked open. I expected to find Mr. Gilroy, but the room was empty. The overhead light flickered. Papers were scattered across the desk, some on the floor, as though knocked over in a hurry. I picked one up, a hand-drawn map of the asylum with small symbols marking specific rooms. My eyes were drawn to a red X on the 3rd floor, where the locked door was located. Beneath the X, someone had written, "Never open. The occupant does not rest." I placed the paper back and realized I still had to do my final tasks. My shift ended at 5 a.m., but I wondered if I dared to stay. I thought about the binding contract I'd signed, the fact I needed this job, so I resolved to keep going. Around 3:30 a.m., I was sweeping near the 2nd floor stairwell when I felt a chill behind me. I turned and nearly dropped my broom. Standing at the far end of the corridor was the figure in white I'd seen before. It seemed taller now, or maybe that was my terror amplifying it. I recalled the rule. Avoid eye contact. Proceed to a different floor immediately. Stepping backward, I kept my gaze toward the floor and gripped the broom handle so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I tried to remain calm, but my steps were shaky. I backed into the stairwell, heart pounding. As I reached the stairs, a strange, hushed voice whispered from behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded pleading. I forced myself not to turn around, not even to respond. The rule was clear: no speaking. I half ran and half stumbled down the stairs. I didn't stop until I reached the 1st floor, where I sank against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. By 4 a.m., the worst of my terror had settled into a sort of numb acceptance. The asylum seemed calmer, as if the strange entities that roamed at night were winding down before sunrise. I made my final note in the spiral notebook for the hour. 4 a.m. Carl M. I had only 1 hour left. According to the rules, I needed to do a last check of the floors, gather my supplies, and head out. Yet there was still the matter of that locked door. I felt an odd compulsion to pass by it one last time. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing. I told myself it would be safer to avoid the 3rd floor entirely. After all, I had no reason to go up there. But that cryptic line about the occupant not resting echoed in my head. Against my better judgment, I found my feet carrying me up the stairs. The corridor on the 3rd floor was silent. I saw the locked door in the distance, looming. Part of me wanted to leave. No, run away. But something deeper tugged me forward. Perhaps I thought I could glimpse the truth behind all these rules. I took a few cautious steps. A feeling of dread built with each footfall. My mind buzzed with warnings. Never open it. Never stand near it for more than 5 seconds. But as I got closer, I saw the handle twitch. Was it my imagination? A faint rasp of metal, like something on the other side, was jostling the lock. I stopped in my tracks. The rule repeated in my head, a desperate mantra. Then, something pounded on the door from the inside. 3 sharp knocks rattling the wood. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The doorknob wrenched as though forced from within, but it stayed locked. Another series of knocks. The entire door shook. I backed away, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I turned and bolted toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard a final crash against the door, as if it splintered but didn't fully break. I refused to look back. By the time I was on the 1st floor, I was covered in cold sweat. My watch read 4:45 a.m. The front lobby was quiet, bathed in weak light from the single lamp outside. Mr. Gilroy was nowhere to be seen, but I didn't have the energy to search for him. I wheeled my cleaning cart into a small storage room, locked it, and clutched the notebook. I added my final entry. 5 a.m. Carl M. Just before leaving, I noticed a final note written at the back of the spiral notebook in a trembling scrawl. Do not linger at the door on your way out. The building watches, and it remembers. I stepped outside, breathing in the crisp morning air. The sky was a faint grey, and I never felt such relief to see the early glow of sunrise. Before I closed the door behind me, I glanced over my shoulder. The old asylum stood in silence, its dark windows looking more like vacant eyes. Even the single lamp seemed to flicker in farewell. I returned the following evening to start my 2nd shift, determined to follow every rule again. Mr. Gilroy was in the office as if he'd never left. He didn't ask about my first night. He simply handed me another set of keys. Mine were still in my pocket, but I took them without question. Without a word, he nodded, silently acknowledging that I'd made it back. For the next few weeks, I stuck rigidly to every instruction in the notebook. I never opened the door on the 3rd floor. I never went near it for longer than 5 seconds. I ignored the humming from room 103, avoided the figure in white, and locked myself in the supply closet at 2:01 a.m. Yet, with each shift, the asylum seemed to reveal new depths of its strangeness. Doors appeared where I was certain there had been walls. Footsteps echoed in corridors that should have been empty. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear the same pleading voice whisper my name, muffled and distant, begging me to break the rules. But I never did. There's an undeniable pull this place has on anyone who enters. Maybe it's the history, maybe something else. Either way, the rules are the thin line between keeping the horrors contained and letting them roam free. As long as I follow them, I survive. If I break them, I risk something far worse than a simple job termination. So if you ever find yourself here, if you're ever given the same shift log I have, heed its words carefully. This building is not your friend. It's a labyrinth of echoes and things that exist just beyond the periphery of reason. Only by adhering to every line in that notebook have I been able to leave at sunrise, day after day. And if someday I fail, you might find my name crossed out in those pages, replaced by another rookie janitor's trembling handwriting. But for now, I'm still here, still breathing, and that alone, in this place, feels like a victory.